When you look at a tree, you can see its trunk, the branches, the leaves, but you can't see what that tree has been through during its lifetime. You can't see the storms that have affected it or the droughts, the birds that have maybe laid nests in its branches years ago, or the insects that invaded it. And it's kind of like a family tree is the same way. When you look at the list of names, you can't see the family drama that has happened behind those names. Who disappointed their parents? Who fell in love and they weren't able to marry the person they loved? Who fought and fell out with each other and never reconciled? When we look at Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3, we see a list of names of the forefathers of Jesus. And the book of Genesis tells us all about those people in that list of names. And this is what we've been doing for the past few weeks, talking about the fathers and sons. We started with Abraham, called the father of multitudes. And then last week we began talking about Isaac, his son. Now, Abraham had been promised that his descendants would be like the stars in the sky, but he had to wait 100 years before his son Isaac was born. And then when that son was born, there was lots of drama between Isaac and Ishmael, Sarah and Hagar, that whole family. When Isaac grew up, he married Rebekah, and they also had to wait for a child to be born. So they prayed to God because God had promised Isaac, just like he promised his father Abraham, that he would be the father of a great nation. This just serves to remind us that God does answer his promises, but he does it in his way and in his time. So Isaac and Rebekah, they prayed to God, and then God gave them twin boys, Esau and Jacob, and they were completely different. Even though they were twins from the very same exact two parents, they were completely different, which makes sense, doesn't it? And I have a sister. She's not my twin, but she's only a year older than me. And although we look alike, which Jacob and Esau didn't look alike, we're completely different. It just makes sense. And my children, they have some things that are some characteristics, physical characteristics in common, even personality characteristics in common, but they're all different, of course. Now, Jacob and Esau, although they were twins, they weren't identical in any way. It says that Esau was a red, hairy baby. I'm sure he was very cute, like all babies are. And he was the bigger twin, and as he grew up, he was known to be more hardworking, a man of the land. He was more physical and a hard worker. But Jacob, his name means grasper, because he was more of a scheming go-getter. He was smaller and he relied on his wits. His name was Grasper because the story says that when they were about to be born, Jacob tried to grasp Esau's heel and bring him back in so he could be born first. Which I don't know how somebody saw that. Maybe it's just a metaphor, like being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. But anyway, it just explains to us that Jacob was always trying to get what Esau had. Now, what's important to know is these aren't just a story of two individual men. These are representatives of the two nations that they were forefathers of. Jacob as the forefather of Israel, and his brother Esau as the forefather of another nation, Edom. And as the Israelite people were telling the story of Jacob and Esau, were they thinking to themselves, how are we like Jacob? How are they like Esau? Are the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, are they hardworking, big and scary, greedy, and maybe making bad decisions? Or we're more like Jacob, the Israelites, more like Jacob, small and having to rely on their wits, maybe not always doing that by the right way. Now, how do we see ourselves? How do we see other people according to their national identities? I mean, are all British people alike? Are all Americans alike? Are all people with a certain skin color or from a certain socioeconomic background alike? I mean, instinctively, immediately our response is no, but we do need to examine if sometimes we have deep-seated feelings that tell us that just because somebody has one thing in common, we judge everybody according to that one characteristic. It's not how God wants us to be. He wants us to love everybody and to see them clearly for who they are. So it's something we need to be careful about in our thinking and in the way we treat people. The story of Esau and Jacob is a story about favorites. Now, in the family systems at that time, there was a favorite, the firstborn son. He was the one who would inherit all the money, all the flocks, all the land. He would be in charge of the family business, in charge of the family when the father died. And because Esau was the firstborn son, he was in that role as the favorite. But not only that, his father Isaac had Esau as his favorite anyway, because Esau would hunt the game that Isaac liked to eat, so Isaac loved him best, where their mother Rebekah loved Jacob best. I mean, favoritism is a big problem in this family tree. We saw back with Abraham that he loved Isaac, but he didn't love his son Ishmael, and he sent Ishmael out in the desert to die. Later on, when Jacob has his own sons, he has one son, Joseph, that he favors so much over the others. If you remember, he gives him that show-offy, colorful coat. And the brothers hated Joseph because he was their father's favorite. And they tried to kill him and they sold him off into slavery. Now, playing favorites is not a good parenting technique. And most parents do try to not have favorites, even though our children still ask us, who's your favorite? It's quite hard for children to understand that we love our children equally. But actually, I've seen this, not just children, but I've had many conversations with women who are pregnant with their second baby. They think, I love that first child so much. I don't know how I possibly could love somebody else as much as I love my child. But like I always say to them, having more children isn't like having a pie that gets sliced up, and the more you have, the smaller piece everyone gets. It's more like having a bath that's full of soap bubbles, and the more that goes in, the more bubbles come out. The more people that we have to love, the more love we have. And it's the same for God too. And do you think God has favorites? Do you think God has a favorite who isn't you, and that makes you feel jealous? I mean, Jesus had something to say about this. In Matthew 5, in the Beatitudes, he says, blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who are meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. In other words, the people that don't look like they're being blessed, who don't look like they're God's favorites, they are. They are the ones who are being blessed, because Jesus said the last will be first, and the first shall be last. But does God have a favorite like a pie sliced up and he doesn't have enough love for all of us? I mean, it says over and over in the Bible that that's not true. You look at the story of the prodigal son, or the workers in the vineyard, or Jonah with the Ninevites, or Peter and Paul preaching to the Gentiles, or the story of the centurion who was healed, or the story of the 5,000 who were fed and the 4,000 were fed. It's clear God doesn't have favorites. He loves us all. And the more of us who love him, the bubbles just come up and there's just more love. So Esau had the benefit of this favoritism. He was the firstborn son, which meant he had the birthright. He was going to get all the flocks, all the land, and the authority over the family. But then one day he was hungry and his brother Jacob had food. So Esau traded his birthright for a mere bowl of lentil soup. Now, teenage boys aren't known for their decision-making capacities, especially when they're hungry. But it does seem like a really dumb thing to do. To, in the moment, trade what you have, which is a great thing, the whole family, to trade it just for your physical needs. But I wonder in this story, who looks worse? Is it Esau for making the spur-of-the-moment decision and thinking about his stomach? Or is it Jacob, who could have just given his brother the food instead of tricking him and cheating him in this way? Now, I wonder if you can put yourself into this story. Would you feel like you're the person who you see someone else has a blessing and you really want it? Or maybe you are a person who has the blessing and that other people want. Or maybe you're a person who feels like you had something really good, but you made a mistake along the way and you lost it. It's worth reflecting on those things and talking to God about them. Then Isaac the father was going to die, and he wanted to bless his son Esau. But Rebekah, his wife, she schemed together with Jacob to get it so Jacob would get the blessing instead. Esau was on his deathbed and he was blind, so Jacob dressed up in Esau's clothes and he made some food that Isaac liked to eat, and he even made kind of like hairy arms for Isaac to feel. And when Isaac said, "Was that Esau or is that Jacob?" Jacob was like, "No, it's really me, Esau. I'm really my brother, I swear it." I mean, for storytelling, it's a really good story. There's death and betrayal, there's costumes. But from the human aspect of it, I think, how terrible. Your father is dying and you dress up like your brother to trick your father. I mean, it's a pretty terrible thing to do to your father, or to your husband for that matter, for Rebekah's side of it, and to do to your brother as well. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for Jacob here. So Jacob deceived Isaac, and he was blessed by Isaac, while Esau wasn't. But is that really true? I mean, as we look on in the rest of the story, is Jacob blessed? Is Esau not blessed? So Jacob, he has to run away from Esau, and Rebekah says, go back to her homeland where she was from, because they were going to get him a bride from that country anyway. That's what they like to do, kind of send their sons back to the homeland to get a bride. And that's what Abraham did when he got Isaac for Rebekah. Now, when Abraham sent his servant to get a wife for his son Isaac, he loaded up the camels and the donkeys or whatever with lots of gifts to pay for the bride, because that was a thing that you did. But Jacob had to flee from his family, so he went with no money. That's why when he saw Rachel and he fell in love with Rachel, he had to work for 7 years in order to marry her. because he wasn't blessed with this birthright or the blessing that Isaac, that he tried to trick his brother and his father out of. He had nothing. And then Jacob worked those 7 years to marry Rachel, but we know that the story, which I'm going to talk about in a couple weeks, we know that he didn't actually marry Rachel. On the wedding day, he was tricked, and he married her sister Leah instead, which is awful. But just to say that Jacob, this trickster, the deceiver of his father and his brother, he was deceived. He was tricked. Now, the rest of this story, it goes on to say that Jacob had 12 sons, that they became the nation of Israel, that God made this great nation. He had 12 sons and at least one daughter that we know of. But was he blessed by this family? I mean, not only were there problems with Joseph, but some of the other stuff that happened with Jacob's sons was a bit, well, dramatic, to say the least. And there was a lot of problems. There was a lot of heartbreak in this family. And was Esau not blessed? I mean, they meet up again in chapters 32 and 33 of Genesis. And Esau brings 400 men with him. And Jacob is really scared that he's going to attack his family and kill them all. In fact, Jacob divides up the family. He sends half of them this way and half of them that way. So if Esau attacks, he would only get half of the family, half of the flocks, half of all the wealth that Jacob has. But Esau doesn't attack them. He brings these 400 men with him, but he forgives Jacob. And it looks like Esau's not doing too badly for himself in spite of not having the birthright and not having the blessing. I think it shows us that God is going to bless and he's going to give where he's going to bless and where he's going to give. It doesn't really have to do with whether or not a father blesses you, whether you're born first or you're born second. In fact, that's a big thing with God in the Old Testament. It's not always the firstborn son who is the one who's blessed. God blesses who he blesses. He gives favor to who he gives favor. And just because you're in a situation that doesn't seem like it's ideal, doesn't mean that God isn't with you. When Jacob had tricked Isaac and stolen Esau's blessing, and he was running away from Esau, he was camping out one night when he was on the run, and he had a dream about a ladder or a ramp going between earth and heaven, with angels going up and down it. And in that dream, God spoke to him, and he said this, "I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you." Then it goes on to say, when Jacob woke up from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." Then, later on in chapter 32, when Jacob is meeting up with Esau again, when Esau's bringing those 400 men and Jacob is really worried, he has another dream or experience where he's wrestling with God. This is where God touches Jacob's hip and gives him a limb for the rest of his life. It's where Jacob's name is changed to Israel, which means he struggles with God. And both of these meetings with God are at times when Jacob is on the run from his brother Esau. At times where he's done things wrong and he's worried and vulnerable about what his brother is going to do to punish him. God is there in the midst of fear, in the midst of running away. Even in the midst of us doing things wrong and making wrong choices, God is right there in the midst of it. Jesus said in Matthew 9:12, "It is not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick." Now, when you're having a hard time, does it feel like God is close to you? I mean, maybe if you're really worried about something or someone, about an accident or an illness or a big problem in your life, you might pray and really feel God's peace and presence. But have you ever felt that way when you were in the midst of a situation where you have sinned, where you have done something wrong, where you're facing the consequence of other people being upset with you? Is that the time when God feels close to you? It shows here in Genesis that is when God is close to us. Surely God is in this place and I was not aware of it. But he's not close so he could pour down blessings on Jacob right then, and he's not close so he can pour down punishment on Jacob right then. God is close to us to help us to change our ways, to turn back to him, to turn back to the right path that he wants us to go on. So this family tree has so much drama in it, lots of twists and turns, plenty for us to see ourselves in, plenty for us to think about the way that we treat others and the way that God treats us. Do we judge people? Do we lump them into just broad categories because of what group they belong to? Do we have favorites? Do we think God has favorites? Do we feel bitter about ways that we maybe think other people have blessings that we don't? Do we feel that God is close to us, not just when things are good, but even when we are doing wrong? Do we have a sense of God's presence? These are all things for us to think about this week. So we thank you, God, that these stories of real people who tried their best to follow you, we pray that you help us, Lord, to learn from their examples, from their successes as well as their failures, in order for us to live in a way that glorifies you. Amen.